Imagine you are standing on a dusty, sun-baked hill in southeastern Turkey. Beneath your feet lies a secret that completely rewrote the entire story of human civilization. We are talking about a time 11,600 years ago. To put that into perspective, this is a world where the last ice age has only just taken its final breath. Woolly mammoths are still roaming certain parts of the earth. Humanity is scattered, surviving day by hunting wild game and foraging for nuts and berries. There are no cities, there is no pottery, there is no wheel, no writing, and absolutely no agriculture. Yet, on this very hill, these ancient hunter-gatherers achieved the impossible. They built a sprawling, monumental stone complex made of massive, T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons. They carved them with intricate, terrifying images of scorpions, lions, foxes, and vultures. This is Gobekli Tepe. It predates the Great Pyramid of Giza by 7,000 years. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. By all the traditional rules of archaeology, this place simply should not exist. But that is not even the strangest part of the story. The true mystery of Gobekli Tepe, the riddle that keeps archaeologists awake at night, isn't just how these prehistoric people built it. It is what they did with it afterward. After using this monumental site for nearly 1,000 years, they didn't just abandon it to the elements. They didn't just walk away and let the wind and rain slowly erode their masterpiece. Instead, they did something baffling. They intentionally, painstakingly, and completely buried it under thousands of tons of dirt, stone, and bone. They erased it from the face of the earth. The question is, why? To even begin to answer that question, we first need to understand the sheer scale of what these people achieved and what it meant to them. For decades, the golden rule of human history was simple. Humans figured out how to farm, which allowed them to settle down in one place, which gave them the reliable food, free time, and resources to invent religion, build temples, and create complex societies. Farming came first. Building came second. Gobekli Tepe took that rulebook and threw it into a prehistoric fire. Here, we have a site that proves human beings were coming together in massive numbers to build a spiritual center long before they ever planted a single grain of wheat. The urge to worship, to gather, to create something larger than themselves, that is what brought them together. And the effort required to pull this off is staggering. Picture the logistics. You have no metal chisels, only flint and stone tools to carve out these towering monolithic pillars from the solid bedrock. You have no domesticated animals to pull them, no carts to roll them on. It would have taken hundreds, maybe thousands of people working in perfect coordination to move a single 20-ton pillar up the hill. And while this massive construction project was happening, all of these workers still needed to eat. They had to be fed by an equally massive network of hunters and foragers, combing the surrounding landscape for wild gazelle, aurochs, and edible plants. It was an intergenerational mega-project, a triumph of early human cooperation. For 1,000 years, generation after generation maintained this sacred space, adding new circular enclosures, carving new pillars, gathering here for what we can only assume were intense, elaborate feasts and rituals under the stars. This hill was the center of their universe. It was the pulsing heart of their culture. So, try to imagine the sheer psychological shift it would take to decide that this deeply sacred, painstakingly built temple had to disappear. You don't just wake up one morning and decide to bury the center of your world. When the decision was finally made to close the doors on Gobekli Tepe, the builders faced an engineering challenge almost as daunting as constructing it in the first place. Think about the physical reality of what they were trying to hide. We are not talking about tossing a few handfuls of dirt over a campfire to put it out. These circular enclosures were massive. Some of the central pillars stood up to 18 feet tall, towering over the people who carved them. To bury just one of these monumental rings meant filling a space roughly the size of a large modern house, straight to the roof, with solid material. And where do you find that much material on a rocky limestone hilltop? You can't exactly order a fleet of dump trucks to drop off some topsoil. Every single ounce of dirt, every jagged rock, every scrap of debris had to be carried by hand. Picture an endless, ant-like procession of people, trudging up those sun-baked slopes, hauling heavy, awkward loads in woven reed baskets or thick animal hide bags. It would have taken tens of thousands of trips back and forth, day after day. The sheer physical toll of this cover-up is mind-boggling to consider. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that burying the temple wasn't a panicked, last-minute retreat from an invading enemy or a sudden natural disaster. It was a highly organized, deliberate mega-project that would have required months, or perhaps even years, of sustained community effort. But the most fascinating part of this monumental burial isn't just how much material they moved. It is what that material actually was. When archaeologists first started digging through the layers of earth covering these beautiful ancient pillars, they expected to find ordinary, sterile soil, perhaps earth scraped up from the surrounding plains. Instead, they hit an absolute goldmine of prehistoric garbage. The backfill covering Gobekli Tepe wasn't just random dirt. It was a dense, carefully packed mixture of limestone rubble, razor-sharp flint flakes, broken stone tools, and an unbelievable amount of animal bones. We are talking tens of thousands of fragmented bones from wild gazelles, wild boars, red deer, and giant wild cattle known as aurochs. It was the leftover remnants of massive, legendary feasts. Imagine throwing a neighborhood barbecue so impossibly epic that the leftover rib bones and broken paper plates could be used to bury your entire house. That is essentially what happened here. The people of Gobekli Tepe were using the refuse from their grand, communal banquets to pack the spaces between the sacred pillars. And this wasn't done haphazardly by just tossing trash over the walls. Researchers studying the stratigraphy, the different layers of the soil, have found that this material was intentionally layered. It was dumped in distinct, careful phases to ensure the monumental stones wouldn't tip over or collapse as the enclosures were filled. They were taking incredible care of the temple even as they were erasing it from the landscape. So the mechanics of the burial are clear. It was a colossal, meticulously planned undertaking, fueled by the leftovers of staggering feasts and carried out with intense precision. But knowing how they did it only deepens the central riddle. Why? Why go to such extraordinary lengths to hide a masterpiece that took generations of your ancestors to build? To find that answer, we have to zoom out and look at what was happening in the world beyond that rocky hill. The earth was shifting beneath their feet, and humanity was about to cross a threshold from which it could never return. While the people of Gobekli Tepe were feasting and hauling dirt, the very climate of the planet was undergoing a radical transformation. The brutal freezing grip of the Younger Dryas, a severe 1,000-year cold snap that had tested human resilience to its limits, was finally breaking. The world was warming up, the ice was retreating, and the region we now call the Fertile Crescent was turning incredibly lush and green. And with that milder weather came a subtle, almost accidental revolution that would change the trajectory of our species. People began to notice that the wild grasses they gathered for seeds could be controlled. If you drop a seed in the ground, another plant grows. If you save the best seeds and plant them together, you get a reliable field of food. It sounds painfully obvious to us today, but for a species that had spent 200,000 years chasing herds across continents, it was the ultimate technological leap. This was the dawn of agriculture, and it was happening right next door. Just 20 miles away from Gobekli Tepe, in the Karakadag Mountains, scientists have genetically traced the absolute earliest ancestor of modern domesticated wheat, a strain known as einkorn. The very first farmers on planet Earth were experimenting with crops right in the temple's backyard, and it wasn't just the plants they were learning to control. Those wild, terrifying beasts, carved deep into the pillars of Gobekli Tepe, were no longer just something to be hunted or feared in the dark. Humans were figuring out how to pen them in. The wild sheep, pigs, and goats of the surrounding hills were slowly being transformed into docile livestock. Now, picture yourself living through this profound psychological shift. For thousands of generations, your ancestors survived by reading the landscape, by tracking migrating herds, by understanding that human beings were just one vulnerable part of a dangerous natural world. Their belief system reflected that deep awe and healthy fear. That is exactly what the art at Gobekli Tepe represents. It is a monument to the wild. There are no carvings of gentle domesticated animals or peaceful fields of grain. Instead, the pillars are crawling with aggressive scorpions, giant spiders, snarling predators, and vultures. It is an architecture of intimidation, built for a hunter-gatherer worldview where untamed nature was the ultimate authority. But suddenly, nature isn't the boss anymore. You are. You control where the food grows. You dictate where the animals live and die. The terrifying wild world depicted on those massive limestone pillars is steadily losing its grip on your daily reality. You no longer need to appease the chaotic spirits of the wild hunt, because you are pulling your meals straight out of the dirt in a predictable, controlled harvest. This brings us to a fascinating theory about why the temple was buried. Gobekli Tepe might have been the ultimate casualty of a prehistoric identity crisis. Imagine a grand cathedral, built for a religion that society is rapidly outgrowing. The towering pillars, once pulsing with vital spiritual energy, might have started to feel alien, perhaps even backwards to a new generation of settled farmers. The psychological center of gravity for humanity had fundamentally shifted. The temple had outlived its original purpose. But this still leaves a massive logical gap. If you have moved on, if you have outgrown a sacred space because your entire way of life has evolved, why not just walk away? Why not let the desert winds slowly swallow the pillars while you tend to your new wheat fields? Why go through the grueling, multi-generational effort of burying it so perfectly? To answer that, we have to completely strip away the way we look at the modern world and try to look through the eyes of an ancient human. Today, when we construct a building, whether it is a house, a skyscraper, or even a cathedral, we view it as a collection of inanimate materials. It is just wood, stone, steel, and glass. When we are finally done with a building, we swing a wrecking ball into it, or we simply lock the doors and let it fall apart. To us, a building is just a thing. But for the hunter-gatherers of the ancient world, the universe did not work that way at all. They likely operated under a worldview that anthropologists call animism. This is a big word for a very simple, profound idea: the belief that absolutely everything is alive. A river is not just flowing water. It has a spirit and a voice. A violent thunderstorm is not just a weather pattern. It has an intention. And a monumental stone pillar, hauled up a mountain by 1,000 hands and carved with the fierce, protective spirits of the wild, that was not just a heavy piece of limestone. To them, it was a living, breathing entity, vibrating with raw, ancient power. And if you believe that something is truly alive, you also understand the fundamental rule of nature. All living things have a life cycle. They are born, they serve their purpose, they grow old, and eventually, they must die. This brings us to the absolute climax of the mystery, the most breathtaking and deeply moving theory about the fate of Gobekli Tepe. The people who buried it were not trying to destroy it out of frustration. They were not desperately trying to camouflage it from an invading enemy. And they certainly were not just using the old enclosures as a convenient prehistoric landfill. What they were doing, across all those grueling months and years of carrying heavy baskets of dirt and stone, was conducting a grand cosmic funeral. They were giving their sacred temple a ritual burial. In the world of archaeology, there is a fascinating concept known as ritual decommissioning. It is the idea that when a deeply sacred object, or in this case, an entire sprawling temple complex, reaches the natural end of its lifespan, you cannot simply toss it aside or leave it exposed to the elements. It has absorbed way too much energy, too much history, and perhaps too much spiritual danger over the centuries. Leaving it to rot out in the open would be an ultimate act of disrespect, a spiritual hazard that could curse the very community that built it. It has to be properly, respectfully laid to rest. It must be carefully returned to the earth from which it came. Picture that final, monumental effort. This was not a quiet, mournful affair. Remember those tens of thousands of animal bones we talked about, packed tightly into the dirt? This tells us that the burial of Gobekli Tepe was accompanied by one of the largest continuous feasts in human history. It was a massive, joyous, and perhaps bittersweet celebration. Think of it like a colossal wake for a passing era. Tribes from all across the region gathered one last time, eating, drinking, and chanting, as they slowly poured the remnants of their magnificent feasts into the sacred rings. With every single basket of dirt and bone they dumped, the towering pillars vanished just a little bit more. The fierce, snarling predators carved into the stone were slowly swallowed by the darkness. The ancient world of the wild hunter-gatherer was literally, physically being put into the ground. Try to imagine standing on that sun-baked hill on the day the very last basket of earth was poured. The massive stone circles were completely gone. The towering monoliths that had defined the skyline and guided travelers for 1,000 years had vanished without a trace. What was once the pulsing, beating heart of their spiritual universe was now just a smooth, rounded mound of dirt, blending perfectly into the grassy landscape. They had successfully closed the portal to the old gods. They turned their backs on the buried temple, walked down the hill, and walked forever into the new world of fields, flocks, and the dawn of modern human civilization. But in that final act of closure, the builders of Gobekli Tepe achieved something they could never have possibly imagined. There is a beautiful, almost poetic irony to this entire story. By meticulously burying their sacred space, by trying to give it a proper death, they accidentally made it immortal. Think about what happens to ancient buildings left exposed to the elements. They are battered by wind and rain. They are shattered by earthquakes. And most destructively of all, they are found by later generations who view them not as sacred sites, but as highly convenient stone quarries. If those monumental T-shaped pillars had been left standing out in the open on that Turkish hilltop, they would have been knocked down, broken apart, and recycled into Roman watchtowers, Byzantine walls, or medieval farmhouses thousands of years ago. The intricate carvings of foxes and vultures would have been entirely scoured away by 11 millennia of blowing sand. Instead, that massive mound of prehistoric garbage acted as the ultimate protective cocoon. It sealed the enclosures in a stable, weatherproof vault, locking them away from the destructive forces of nature and the heavy footfalls of future empires. The complex slept in the dark, completely undisturbed, for over 116 centuries. It just waited. When researchers finally sliced into that rounded hill in the mid-1990s, they didn't find a ruined, weathered shadow of the past. They found a pristine time capsule. They found the exact moment that human history pivoted, frozen perfectly in limestone. So, what does this ancient, hidden masterpiece actually mean for us today? Gobekli Tepe forces us to look in the mirror and completely rethink who we are as a species. For centuries, we told ourselves a very practical, almost robotic story about our own evolution. We figured out how to farm because we were hungry. We built cities because we needed shelter. And only after we were safe, settled, and comfortable did we finally start dreaming about the cosmos and building monuments. But this buried hill proves the exact opposite. It was our insatiable human need for meaning, our drive to gather, to tell stories, and to connect with the great mysteries of the universe that came first. That deep spiritual hunger is what pulled us together and set us on the path to the modern world. As we continue to rapidly evolve today, moving our lives from the physical earth into the digital realm and eventually out into the stars, you have to wonder, what sacred pillars of our own modern world are we currently outgrowing? What grand monuments of our current civilization will we eventually decide to intentionally bury, leaving them behind for someone else to find 10,000 years from now? If this journey deep into our ancient past sparked your curiosity, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with a fellow history nerd, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an exploration. Drop a comment down below and tell me, what do you think those ancient builders were feeling on the day they finally covered the very last stone? Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next mystery.